Some bonds are not born of blood, but of loneliness. Two lost souls finding each other in a world that no longer made room for tenderness. And sometimes, what you thought was just a wild animal turns out to be the only thing standing between you and the dark. This is the story of a woman who lost her husband, lost her child, and a bobcat, born to live in the forest, but who chose to stay because of love. A creature that couldn't speak, yet spoke up for justice, at the exact moment it mattered most. And you won't believe what happened when it showed up at the final threshold to protect the one it called home. The early sunlight caressed the tallest treetops of Oregon's rainforests, scattering pale golden fingers over the roof of a small house in the coastal town of Willow Haven. A town where time seemed to walk slower, where the rhythm of waves and the scent of pine filled each morning. In an old wooden house nestled at the edge of the woods, Clara Whitmore was making her morning tea. At 68, she had learned to live with the absence of a husband, lost to cancer 10 years ago, and the absence of a son who vanished in a winter skiing accident she would never forget. The house once brimmed with laughter. Now only the soft clatter of the kettle and the warmth of an old sweater draped over the back of a chair remained. Elise, her only granddaughter, now lived in Seattle and only visited occasionally. On rainy days like today, loneliness had a shape. The shadow of Clara cast on the wooden floor, longer, quieter. A gentle knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Clara squinted, set down her teacup, and slowly walked to the door. Standing there was Caleb Monroe, a renowned trapper in the region, known for finding things the forest didn't want found. In his hands was a bundle wrapped in old flannel, held tight as if it contained something fragile or dangerous. "Morning, Mrs. Whitmore." Caleb smiled, a crooked grin that never felt honest. "Got something special for you. Thought of you right away." Clara didn't hide the suspicion in her eyes. Caleb made his living selling wild meat and things not listed in any ranger's logbook. He was the kind of man who could smell where money lay and wasn't afraid to wade deep into the shadows to fetch it. "Coming by this early, there must be a reason," Clara said, keeping her hand on the door frame. Caleb unwrapped the flannel slightly, and the moment she saw the tufted ears and amber eyes, glowing like late sun through stained glass, Clara nearly forgot how to breathe. "A kitten?" she asked, her voice barely above a breath. "Not your average cat," Caleb replied, gently stroking the small creature's back as it stirred. "Rare breed. Some folks would pay $1,000 for one of these, but I think you need it more than they do." Clara smiled, a real smile, the first in weeks. For a moment, she was no longer the widowed woman living alone at the forest's edge. She was once again the Clara of old, who had once cradled newborn lives in her arms, soothing each fragile breath. "How much?" she asked. "300, Caleb said, hesitating. "But for you, 200 will do." 200, nearly half of her monthly pension. But when the creature looked up at her, not with fear, but with a gentle curiosity, Clara knew she couldn't turn away. "You won't regret it," Caleb said, placing the flannel bundle in her arms. Clara didn't reply. She simply tightened her arms slightly around the warm little bundle. Inside it, a wild soul had just found shelter. She just didn't know yet. It would change the rest of her life. $200. Nearly all the cash Clara had left for the month, and yet she handed it over. There was something in the eyes of that tiny creature, not pleading, not frightened, just waiting, that made it impossible for her to walk away. 20 minutes later, she sat in her rocking chair by the window, the flannel bundle resting gently on her lap. The creature, now awake, was quietly exploring the folds of her old sweater with one small claw, as if afraid of hurting the past. "What's your name?" Clara whispered, her old fingers trembling as they stroked the russet fur speckled with pale spots like footprints fading into mist. The animal made a sound halfway between a cry and a sigh. Not a cat's meow, nor a weasel's whimper. It sounded like wind rustling through roots, deep and tender. "Rowan," she murmured. "That was my son's favorite name, when he was little." The creature lifted its head, amber eyes gleaming with something close to awareness. Then it nuzzled into her hand. In the days that followed, Clara lived differently without noticing. Each morning she placed an old porcelain dish by the window. Rowan would wait there, his pointed ears always tilted toward her footsteps. He didn't eat canned food. The only thing he seemed interested in was fresh meat, beef, chicken, sometimes the salmon gifted by the shopper downtown. "Picky, just like my son used to be," she'd laugh, placing a slice of meat on the plate. Rowan would lick his lips, then eat slowly, as if observing some sacred ritual of the wild. She also began speaking more, not to people, but to him. About the time she held her baby boy in winter, about her first glimpse of the ocean after the war, about how her husband used to make tea with his left hand, though he was right-handed. Rowan didn't answer, of course, but he listened, and that was all she needed. 3 months passed. Rowan was no longer small. He now stood as tall as Clara's knee, gliding around the house like a shadow given shape. His steps made no sound, but whenever he appeared, the air seemed to change. Thicker, quieter, as if the forest held its breath around her. He leapt atop the fridge as easily as a house cat onto a chair. Sometimes Clara would wake in the middle of the night to find him sitting silently at the window, watching the trees, but never once, not even once, had he shown the slightest threat toward her. One early autumn morning, the wooden door opened to the wind carrying the scent of wet leaves and ripe apples. "Grandma, are you home?" Elise's voice rang from the porch, gentle yet firm, like her. "Come in, dear," Clara called, folding the fabric she was stitching. Elise stepped in, bringing with her the brightness and chill of the woods. Her brown hair tied high, camera slung over one shoulder, her dark eyes lit up at the sight of the woman she loved most in the world. "I brought you some pumpkin bread," she said, placing the bag on the table. But then she paused. Elise's eyes dropped to the hearth rug. There lay Rowan, legs stretched out, amber eyes calmly watching the stranger. Not afraid, not avoiding. Elise stepped forward slowly as if hypnotized. "Grandma," she began, her voice lowered. What is that?" "That's Rowan," Clara smiled. "My cat. Caleb brought him over last summer." Elise leaned down, looking closer. Tufted ears, paws larger than usual, a short tail, faint stripes on the back, and those eyes that looked like they belonged to another world. "Grandma," she swallowed, "that's not a cat. That's a bobcat. A wild bobcat." Clara blinked. "A bobcat?" "Yes, a protected species. You can't keep it. It's not legal, and it can be dangerous." She looked back at Rowan. He looked back at her. No claws bared, no growling, just a gaze, understanding and quiet. "But he's not wild anymore," she said, her voice as soft as breath. Elise stayed crouched, her eyes locked on the creature. "This is more complicated than I thought." Rowan stepped closer, his nose gently touching Elise's hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she reached out and lightly touched his head. "We have to find a way," Elise said, "to keep him here. Legally." Clara didn't answer, but her eyes shimmered, as if hearing an old melody her heart once knew. Elise froze. The image on her phone screen said it all: pointed ears with tufts, unusually large paws, a short, stubby tail, a thick coat speckled like sunlight breaking through forest leaves. "Elise," Clara whispered, her hand resting on the back of the curled-up creature at her feet. "There's no mistake," Elise murmured. "It's a Canada bobcat, a wild bobcat, a rare species, strictly protected by federal law." Clara removed her glasses, leaned in closer to the screen. She looked again at the creature resting in her lap, then back at the photo, then into his eyes. She didn't need to say it. She knew Elise was right. "Oh, dear God," she breathed, her voice caught in her throat. "Now I understand why he's different from any cat I've ever had." Elise shut the phone, her expression darkening. "Caleb tricked you," she said, her voice tight. "He probably poached its mother and sold the cub. This is a complete violation of the law, Grandma." Clara looked down. Rowan had just woken up, stretching lazily before gently rubbing his head against her leg, as if sensing the tension in the room. "No," Clara said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. Elise paused. "Why not?" "Because he isn't wild anymore," Clara whispered, her hand gliding gently over the warm fur. "He's been with me since he was just a tuft of fuzz. He eats beside me, sleeps beside me. Not once has he hurt me, Elise. Not once." Elise clenched her fists, her voice trembling. "But you can't keep a bobcat as a pet. It's not just illegal, it's unfair to him. He was born to live in the wild, not in a cabin." Clara tilted her head. "And if they take him away, what then? Release him back into the woods? They'll bring him to a rescue center, rehabilitate him, retrain his wild instincts, and maybe release him. But Rowan's been with you too long. His chances of survival in the wild are very low." A long silence followed. Rowan suddenly rose on his hind legs, placing his front paws gently on Clara's knee. His amber eyes looked straight into hers. No words needed. Then, ever so softly, he pressed his head to her chin, a gesture full of tenderness, as if to say, "I'm here. I choose to stay." Clara closed her eyes. Tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks. "Elise, he's all I've had. Since your grandfather passed. Since your father left. This house used to be cold as stone. He came and brought warmth back." Elise sat beside her. She took the weathered hands she had held so many times as a child. "I understand," she said softly. "I really do, but we need to do this right, at least find a legal way. There might be a solution." Clara nodded gently. "As long as I don't have to say goodbye to him," she said. "I couldn't bear another loss." In the weeks that followed, Elise began a quiet race against time. She combed through federal laws, called wildlife centers across Oregon, even reached out to a friend in the wildlife biology department at Oregon State University. She asked about cases of bobcats raised from infancy, unreleasable, whether it was possible to apply for a permit to keep one for community education. The answer, after days of waiting, was yes. In special cases, if it could be proven that the animal could not survive in the wild and could serve an educational purpose, the authorities could grant a long-term permit under the designation of animal ambassador. But it required a long list of conditions: a secure enclosure, medical records, behavioral assessments, documentation from a certified veterinarian. Clara said only one thing after Elise explained everything. "No matter the cost, no matter what it takes, I'll do it, as long as I get to keep Rowan." And so, Rowan officially entered the process of legalization. Elise helped her build a wooden enclosure outside, spacious and sturdy, with a roof and high fences. They installed surveillance cameras, kept behavior logs, and feeding schedules. A veterinarian from a city 70 miles away came to examine Rowan, who said, nearly in awe, "This animal trusts people more than most house cats I've met." And though he was growing, nearly 30 pounds by the 6th month, Rowan never used his claws or teeth on Clara. He always moved slowly around her, always slept at the foot of the bed, and always appeared by the kitchen door every morning when she woke. No one taught him that. He just knew. Spring arrived in Willow Haven like a gentle song. Though snow still dappled the forest, the air carried the scent of rebirth, damp soil, budding shoots, and a breeze whispering of something deeper than life itself. In the wooden cabin at the edge of town, Rowan, now fully grown, nearly 30 pounds, began to act strangely. He no longer lay curled on the rug beside the hearth. Instead, he stood longer at the threshold, watching the woods as if waiting. Sometimes, in the early morning, Clara would wake and find him gone. But a moment later, he would reappear at the kitchen door, ears alert, tail swaying gently as if he'd just completed a secret mission. Then came that day. Elise left the cabin earlier than usual. She had a photo shoot at the community park, where wildflowers were in full bloom after the first rain of the week. Camera slung over her back, her mind drifted beneath sunlight filtering through the canopy. She didn't notice the 3 figures lounging on the stone table near the trail until she heard a voice. "Hey, photographer girl, where are you rushing off to?" Elise froze. She recognized Brent Haynes immediately, along with Trevor and Lance, 3 young men from the old Tanner place, already warned by police for forest vandalism and harassment. Elise quickened her pace, fingers tightening around her bag strap. "Don't react, ignore them," she told herself. But Brent had already jumped off the table, blocking her path. A whiff of alcohol clung to his jacket. "Relax, we just want to talk." "I'm not interested," Elise replied, her voice still steady. Trevor circled behind her, forcing her to stop. "You live with that old lady, right?" he sneered. "Heard you two got a wild cat." Elise stepped back, heart pounding. No one else around the park, homes far off, weak cell reception. She began calculating the distance to the gate, the wind direction, her escape angle. Brent stepped closer. "What? Think you're better than us? Too pretty to be polite?" Her hand was already on her pepper spray, palms slick with sweat. Then a roar tore through the air. Not a meow, not a bark, but a sound as ancient and raw as the forest itself. A cry born from the deepest instinct of a creature who lived and died to protect its territory and what it loved. A blur of russet fur leapt from the bushes, faster than the eye could catch. Brent had barely stepped back before Rowan landed between him and Elise, claws slicing the wet grass, spine arched like a drawn bow. He didn't need to roar a second time. Trevor screamed first, stumbling as he tried to flee. Lance followed, tripping and scrambling on all fours. Brent stood frozen, panic locked in his eyes as Rowan's burning amber gaze bored into him. Rowan took a step, silent, light, yet as heavy as a warning. "Shit, it's a mountain lion!" Brent shrieked, then turned and ran, crashing into a tree trunk on the way. Elise remained frozen like a statue. Her heart pounded wildly, breath caught in her throat, but her eyes never left the creature now turning toward her. Rowan stepped closer, his tense face softened. He lowered his head, gently nudging her leg as if to ask, "Did I make it in time?" Elise knelt, her trembling hand reaching for his thick, soft fur. "Rowan," she whispered, as though calling a piece of her soul just returned to her. Rowan made a soft sound, half purr, half breath, then turned, walking ahead as if to say, "Let's go." The two of them, one human, one forest soul, walked quietly through the park beneath the long shadows of trees. No words were spoken, but both knew what bound them today had no name. "Is that a mountain lion?" Kyle shouted, stumbling backward as if the ground had cracked open beneath him. Rowan, with his russet coat speckled in silver, didn't move. But every muscle in his body was taut like a bowstring, ready to spring if anyone stepped closer. Trevor, behind Elise, let out a choked cry, then turned and bolted. Lance didn't hesitate either, sprinting after him, tripping over a root, face planting into the dirt before he could scream. Kyle just stood there, eyes wide. Elise could see sweat glistening on his brow despite the cool air. Then, like a stunned animal snapping back to life, he spun around and fled, his stumbling footsteps fading into the thinning woods. Rowan didn't chase. He simply stood there, back arched, tail low, amber eyes locked on Elise, as if still measuring danger. Then, when no sound remained but the wind and Elise's heartbeat, Rowan turned. The ferocity in his eyes faded like mist. He walked to her side, lowered his head, and gently nudged her hand. "Elise," Clara's voice called faintly in the distance, full of worry. But Elise didn't answer. She was already on her knees, arms wrapped around Rowan's neck. A wild bobcat, born to belong to the forest, now lay safely in the arms of a human, as if the only place he wanted to be was here. Back at the cabin, Clara stood on the porch, a dish towel in hand, eyes wide as she saw Elise emerge from the woods, hair tousled, hand resting on Rowan's back like she never wanted to let go. "Good heavens," Clara gasped. "Where have you—" "Rowan disappeared after lunch, I thought." "Grandma," Elise interrupted, her voice still trembling. "Rowan saved me." Elise sat in the rocking chair beside her and recounted everything, from Brent's eyes, Rowan's roar, to the moment the boys fled as if the forest itself had rejected them. Clara didn't interrupt. But as she listened, her face changed, from worry to fury, then to a glow Elise had only seen when her grandmother spoke of her late husband. Pride. "He protected you," Clara said, her eyes glistening. "Like family." Elise nodded. "But this won't stay simple, Grandma. Those three will talk. People will ask. They might call wildlife officials, and—" "Let them." Clara lifted her chin, eyes piercing the woods. "They dared touch my granddaughter, and yet I'm not allowed to keep a creature this noble." Rumors spread like fire through dry leaves. The next day, the cabin phone rang non-stop. Neighbors called, not to protest, but to check on Elise, to hear the tale of the forest cat that saved the girl, in every exaggerated version imaginable. As for Kyle and his friends, they suddenly went quiet. A friend of Clara's at the general store said she saw them packing and talking about leaving town. A cafe owner claimed she overheard them muttering, "This town's weird, like the woods are watching over the people." Then, a week later, came a familiar knock on the door. Sheriff Dan Hadley, the same boy Clara once watched play in the mud behind her house, stood there, hat in hand, expression not angry, not amused, just carrying the silence of a man who knew something bigger than the law was now at stake. "Clara," he said gently, "I need to ask you about a bobcat." Clara invited him in. No denial, no dodging. Rowan, as if sensing the moment, was already seated on the rug before the fireplace, upright, tail neatly curled, gaze calm and strikingly composed. Dan looked at him for a long time. "People talk, and now I've seen it with my own eyes," he said slowly. "I used to be a ranger. I've never seen a bobcat, sitting like that in a living room." Clara told him everything, from Caleb selling the animal, to the day Elise discovered the truth, to their effort to legalize his stay. Elise presented the files emails from the state university, and even a draft of the application for educational custody. Dan nodded. What Caleb did was wrong, very wrong, but I'm not here to go after you. You didn't hunt, you nurtured. That youngster over there, he glanced at Rowan, clearly chose to stay, and clearly isn't a threat. He stood, placed his hat back on his head. I should report this to Wildlife Services, he said, then paused. But I've got other matters needing attention, things that might take time, maybe weeks, maybe months. Clara held her breath. Elise pressed her lips together. Dan turned toward the door, took a step, then added, In the meantime, I suggest you get all the paperwork in order, and tell Rowan I appreciate what he did. The door closed gently behind him. Clara turned to Rowan, her hand trembling as it stroked his spine. You heard that, didn't you? They know now, and you're still here, just like you've always been. Sheriff Dan Hadley stood in silence for a moment, eyes fixed on Rowan, still seated on the rug, posture upright, gaze glowing like ember light from the hearth. This animal. He shook his head slightly, as if still processing what he'd witnessed. He understands every word we say. Clara gently ran her hand down Rowan's back. He's special, she said, needing no other words. Dan sighed, his hand brushing through his thinning hair. By the book, I should report this to the Department of Wildlife. He hesitated. That's the proper procedure. From the doorway, Elise stepped in. Her voice was soft but clear. And are you going to? A deep silence followed. Then Dan looked Elise straight in the eye, his voice firm, not from anger, but from a sense of justice. To be honest, I've been waiting months for the Tanner boys to cross a line. They kept harassing, trespassing, and I never had enough to truly act on. He looked back at Rowan, then smiled as if seeing an unexpected ally. And then, somehow this Bobcat did what I couldn't. He made them afraid, made them leave. Dan placed his hand on the doorknob, hat already in place, but he didn't leave just yet. So, I think any official investigation into unusual wildlife sightings in this town will have to wait. And time, as you know, can be quite flexible. Clara looked up, eyes brimming. Elise smiled, grateful. We're completing the documentation, she said, applying for a license for public education purposes. Good, Dan nodded. I hear the nature preserve down in South Bay's been needing a new ambassador. Then he added, in a voice like a grown son quietly thanking his mother, and thank you both for being a precious part of this place. Summer passed like a breath. Rowan became a name everyone knew, but few dared speak aloud. He was a living legend, without needing to be in the news. On Friday afternoons, Elise took Rowan to the elementary school, where children with eyes bright as new moons gathered around him, asking innocent questions. Can he smile? Does he dream when he sleeps? Would he miss Grandma Clara if he went far away? Elise only smiled, brushing her hand along Rowan's back. He's not a pet, he's a companion. Clara still sat on her old wooden chair on the porch every sunset. Rowan lay beside her, head resting on her leg. No leash, no cage, just trust, deep as tree roots. One day, she said to Elise, "Some things that seem like mistakes turn out to be blessings in disguise." Elise turned, wind brushing through her hair. "And some of the ones we think we've rescued," she said, "turn out to be the ones who hold us together." Rowan, patrolling the yard, paused when he heard their voices. He turned, eyes catching the light of the setting sun, glowing like drops of amber in autumn gold. He ran to them, light as a shadow, quietly slipping into the moment. No words, no miracles, just presence. In the woods around Willow Haven, the whispers began to spread. Lost children were found not far from home, saying they heard something guiding them. Hikers claimed something followed them from afar, not to hunt, but to watch over. And sometimes, on foggy nights just after sunset, people swore they saw a flash of amber fire in the darkness, like watchful eyes, like the spirit of the forest who had chosen to stay with humankind. And in the little cabin on the edge of town, where a woman once believed her life had already passed, she now lived once more, because a wild creature had chosen to become family.